Hello, please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee on Thursday, the 9th of January 2025 at the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Johnny Morris, Chairperson of the committee. Can I remind members to use their microphones, and can everyone ensure their mobile phones are on silent? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all instructions given to you by our team. Turning to the agenda, Councillor Godfrey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I note from the agenda that this meeting is not being broadcast. Could you explain why?
If I could hand over to...
Thank you. Yes, happy to take that one. Unfortunately, some of the kit was damaged whilst the room was being cleaned over the Christmas break. So we're waiting for a replacement part, a sort of small box, which is hopefully being replaced in the next 2 to 3 days. It isn't a legal requirement to broadcast this meeting, but hopefully we'll be back up and running very shortly.
Thank you. I hope this won't affect the Chairman's microphone, which doesn't seem to be working.
If I could just add, I think it's the speakers aren't working in the room, so we are going to have to, we're just relying on the speakers on the microphones.
I can hear you perfectly.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I shall enunciate clearly for the benefit of all those present. And I'll continue using it as well, so just in case. Okay, we don't have any apologies, as far as I'm aware. Item 2, disclosures of interest. Do we have any declarations? Moving on then. I have no particular announcements for this particular meeting. So moving to item 4, to note the Audit and Governance Work Programme, which is pages 5 to 6. Any comments? Or can I consider that noted? Noted. Item number 5, the minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Referring back to the resilience issue we just had Mr. John refer to. At the last meeting, I raised the issue of a report on the loss of IT services due to flooding, which is not mentioned in the minutes, nor is it mentioned in the future work programme. I wonder if I'm getting myself confused with a different subject, but we were going to believe, I thought we were going to see a report on the outage.
Officer Keys.
Yes, you are correct. I did commit to bring a debrief to this committee on the incidents that happens with IT just before Christmas, and I will include that in the quarterly report that comes to this committee at its next meeting.
Can we have the minutes of a previous meeting updated to reflect that, please?
I think that's acceptable. I think I was agreed with that. Yep. Okay. We should do so. Okay. Item 6, public participation, none. Which takes us to item number 7, the certification of claims and returns annual report. For Officer Terry Horner to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the report with the factual findings by KPMG regarding the housing benefit subsidy assurance process. So specific to housing benefit and subsidy. The report is made to the DWP and ourselves at the DWP's request. This particular report I appreciate it's quite short, and the report from the KPMG itself is relatively short this year, as you'll see, as there's been the usual level of checking, process of checking. The initial testing has been applied, the CAPE testing, the cumulative assurance knowledge and experience testing has been applied, but there is only one finding this year on the report itself, so that's in relation to an unclaimed element of subsidy. It's a relatively small amount, £8.47, We occasionally have other amounts that other issues within these reports, but I'm afraid this is extremely boring this time, and it's the only one that's there for discussion. If there's anything else you would like me to say, please ask away.
Okay, good questions from officer councillors. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. My only question is, where do we go from here? We've had, I think, it coming down every single year since I've been on this committee. £8.47 is an amazing result in terms of all those boxes. Where next? You know, what are we going to do next? Are we aiming for 80p or zero?
Let's go for zero, please, Councillor Power. So yes, preferably zero is always the aim. We do, obviously, you know, we've talked before about the amount of transactions that we deal with. You know, we have over 400 still new claims of housing benefit in any financial year. Over 9,000 change of circumstances we've had this year. So there's still a huge volume of work that's passing through this particular area. And so I can only sort of say that the team that are involved with dealing with this are doing a terrific job, really, in making sure that the amount of error is kept to an absolute minimum. And they do, you know, obviously beyond what we see here today. You know, this is just a report on the subsidy levels. So we have internal audit as well on that, and the last 2 or 3 of those have been substantial assurance reports. So they're doing a terrific job. We're keeping it as low as possible. There is a very small team. It's very challenging, so the balance is quite tricky. But I think this is at the moment the best we can hope for. But I still aim for zero, if that's all right.
I have expectations of less next year, Chairman. I don't want to be unreasonable. I just think we ought to congratulate the entire team on this. It's an amazing job, and it just gets better and better.
I think I echo your statements, and I think that perfection is achievable, and so we should expect that for next year. Councillor Cromwayson?
Yeah, it's just a question of, if you like, putting in layman's language, if you could just describe the scope of the claims that we're that this department is dealing with, and on behalf of the City Council. It's relatively the first time I think I've come up against this, so if you could just define what the scope is, to someone as if they didn't know anything about this. It was more of a question I had in mind for it being a public meeting, but bearing in mind we have no public and no one online, it's perhaps a less relevant question, but perhaps just useful to get it nailed in layman's terms, what it is that we're dealing with here.
So housing benefit, I know as obviously councillors, a lot of you come across this with your constituents, so you've been in discussions. You know, it's quite a complex area. It is a very complex area. The government changed the rules frequently, and the conditions, etc. So it's changing all the time. There's obviously universal credit in the mix. But in terms of this team in particular, so obviously housing benefit is one of the things that they deal with, and that's a large area. And in this case, they're dealing with, so that number of claims, so they take a claim from an individual. A claim can take anything from an hour to 2 hours to process. It's a lot of data that they have to process. They have to consider things like pensions. They have to decide what type of pension, etc. it's relating to, earnings, level of income. There's a lot of information within those applications. Change of circumstances is obviously a part area of those particular claims as well. So usually, a change of pay, people that have paid changes on a frequent basis. Universal credit, the way that works these days, we get a notification for every change that comes through. So every single change happens, and we get thousands of those obviously a year to process. So to a large extent, that's the housing benefit sort of side of the process itself. The scope of the actual assurance process here, the testing that the KPMG do. So they start with initial testing on each particular on the main headline cells, they refer to them in the report, and there's two of those. So that's the HRA and the rent rebates. Rent rebates and rent allowance. Rent rebates is what's known to us as HRA, basically. We don't have any non-HRA within there at the moment. I mean, we're expecting some of those this year, but yet to see anything. And they do initial testing on those headlines, and that's 20 cases, but they take each of those cases and they test the whole thing through the whole of the year. So it's not just 20 doesn't sound very many on an initial test, but when you go through the whole channel all through the financial year and take the claim right back from April to March, that's quite a considerable amount of testing. So this process goes on for a number of weeks. The staff are heavily involved in that because they get a lot of questions. They have to provide evidence, which is kept in our document management system, and KPMG have obviously a duty to ask a considerable number of questions regarding the complexity of the evidence, where the evidence is kept, etc., etc. I don't know if there's anything more I could say on that. That's housing benefit in a nutshell for the team, but of course the team does deal with council tax reduction as well, DHP, EHF, VEPS, every acronym under the sun effectively in benefits. So they deal with a whole load of other work on that as well as the housing benefit itself. Is that anywhere close to what you're asking, Councillor? Or?
Yes, if I could just ask a supplementary in that. So if I've taken the figures correctly from the report, are we dealing with sort of something like 18 to 19 million pounds, and there's an £8.47, which was not actually claimed from the government?
That's correct.
So we're talking about a tiny amount of money against a big sum of money.
Yes, and it wasn't claimed from the government. Obviously, we've claimed it now. Now it's been pointed out, so we're not short by anything. The housing benefit claim it relates to is none the wiser. There's no shortage in the actual housing benefit payment that was made. It's just specific to the subsidy in this case. And I can tell you it was in relation to a year. So a year was entered. It should have been put in as 2022, and it's put in as 2023. An easy mistake to make, but like I say, I think we're identifying this happening on a very, very, very limited occasion. So.
Okay, so KPMG's value add was £8.47. Fantastic.
Yes, you want to know how much this cost, don't
worry.
you? Let's
No, I'm
not.
not gonna ask.
Let's not.
Thank you. Any further questions from officers? Then I shall move to the recommendations that we where is it? Yep.
If I may, should we add our congratulations to the team on this, I think?
I think that's a very good idea. I think we should congratulate the team on the improvement and the extremely small but very limited amount of stuff they needed to report, and we look forward to having an even more boring and even shorter report next year.
I'll see what I can do about the boring, but I think my Section 151 officer is very pleased with boring on this occasion. So, but thank you, and I will make sure that goes back to the team. Appreciated.
Okay, thank you. So, have we considered the report? Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay. So, we move to item number 8, the implementation of the Global Internal Audit Standards, which is to be introduced by Anthony Harvey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. So, paper before you this evening just gives an overview of the new Global Internal Audit Standards. Since 2013, we've been required to comply with the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, which were based on the Institute of Internal Auditors International Professional Practice Framework. In January 24, the IA made a significant revision to the International Professional Practice Framework, the introduction of the Global Internal Audit Standards. and the standards are set to replace the public sector internal audit standards. They come into force for the private sector last week, and they will apply from ourselves from the 1st of April. Now, how they've arranged the standards is significantly different to what was there previously, but most of the themes and most of the requirements are really familiar to what was been there previously. However, there is quite a few new expectations and a lot greater prescription in some of these areas. And some of the new requirements are outlined for you in paragraph 11.5, which is on agenda page 23. Now, they're applicable to both the public and the private sector. However, within the UK, because of legislation, there's been a requirement for a couple of papers to sort of bridge the gap between the global internal audit standards, which apply to everyone across the board, and obviously some of the nuances that apply to the UK public sector. So that's prompted 2 consultation documents. One is an application note on the global internal audit standards. The consultation for that was during October. At the time of writing the report, we were waiting the outcomes, but they have now been published, and there's no change between the consultation document and the final document. Some of the additional requirements from that are for you in paragraph 11.9. The second consultation document is in and around the Code of Practice for the Governance of Internal Audit in the UK. And it's a lot more informative. It's a really key document that bridges a lot of the gaps between the standards and how it applies for the UK. And certainly addresses a lot of the differences between the private sector and the public sector in terms of relative powers of the what's called the board, which is those charged with governance. The consultation document for that opened at the end of October, it closed at the end of November, we're still awaiting the outcomes, but based upon the initial consultation documents, what we've done is done some gap analysis, worked on the worst case scenario, and we think we have everything in place and ready based upon the outcome of those consult documents. But obviously until we've seen the final versions, if some extra changes are needed, then we will factor those in. One of the key differences with the Code of Practice for Internal Audit is it does place quite a few requirements on us, but there are some additional requirements that aren't within our power to enact and are for each of the individual partners that we work with to put into place. So as soon as we've seen those final consultation documents, we're obviously liaised with Liz and Gareth to make sure those areas are being addressed internally for those areas that we can't address ourselves. Obviously I'll stop there, but I'm more than happy to take any sort of questions on any of the underlying detail. We'll try and flesh out some of those areas in a bit more detail.
Thank you. I have some questions, but I'll give officers a chance to get in first. Any questions? Councillor Power?
Thank you, Chairman. I note that there's no resource implications for Winchester Council, but it sounds like there has been considerable resource implications for SIAP. That's my first question. And of course, the rider to that is, will there be any difference in what we see as a result of your reports, or indeed the cost to Winchester Council?
Yes, it has been, and it continues to be extremely considerable and onerous on ourselves to make sure that we can fully prove that we're hopefully fully compliant with every element of all of the standards. Now, previously, within the public sector internal audit standards and the local government application note, I think there was 404 individual elements of those standards that we had to comply with. With a greater prescription, it's made it even more onerous. Fortunately, a lot of the areas that are now prescribed that previously weren't a requirement for us to comply with, we already had in place, like performance measures, but there are certain extra elements that we will need to do. So one of the areas is consultations with yourselves as the board over certain areas that previously was never a requirement, as I say, about in and around the performance measures. there's some extra requirements in and around developing an internal audit strategy for the next 5 years that applies to ourselves rather than yourselves, that we're going to have to demonstrate compliance with certain other elements as well. So it's given us quite a headache, but we think we're there. We think we're going to be subject to the consultations closing and final results being received, but we think everything's going to be in place and all lined up ready for the standards that sort of come into place from April. In terms of what you see from ourselves, there will be very, very little difference. The one kind of significant change is previously we were required once every 5 years to be independently assessed by an external body and bring those results to yourselves, and then in the interim 4-year periods to do a self-assessment that essentially just figured as a one-liner in your progress reports and the annual report and opinion. What we will be required for the future is also bring the outcome of those self-assessments and any action plans. So that's really going to be one of the key changes that you'll see, but there will be sort of certain other documents that you'll need to be sort of seen and consulted on as well. Some of those consultations we're trying to weave into our surveys that we do every year, so that will help to address some of those areas, but there will be a few other little tweaks and twiddles that we need to do as well. In terms of cost for yourselves, then that's something that we've absorbed as the partnership and won't be passed on to yourselves. There'll be no dilution of what we previously do. It's just putting some extra requirements on ourselves, but it's obviously, as internal auditors, you expect us to comply, and obviously we think we've got everything in place that will need to be done.
Thank you. Councillor Comoyson.
I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but clearly there's changes coming through here. I'm guessing that on the whole, we think on the whole they're good. But is there anything in here where actually, well, your reaction says maybe that's not 100% true. What I'm trying to get here is there anything in this where it's kind of an eyeball roll and you think, really, have we got to do that? Is that, it's more onerous? My take on it is it's not optional for us to not do this, but are there requirements being placed on councils here that perhaps are just adding to the complexity and the, how onerous things are, that ends up with cost ultimately in the long run, that you kind of would like political representation pushing back on the need to have it this complex?
I think where they're global standards, then where internal audit within the UK is so well established, it's enshrined in legislation, has been since 1972 in all of the revisions, the last being the Accounts and Audit Regs 2015. It's already there anyway, but where they're global standards and it's almost trying to raise everything up from the lowest common denominator, then it does just add extra layers of complexity that we got to navigate through. But I think because in a lot of it, it's how you bridge the gap between what the global standards say and what UK legislation says, because as standard setters, global internal audit standard setters being the IAA, they obviously can't dictate legislation to however many countries there are in the world. So it's just how you then demonstrate that you're bridging those gaps and you're still complying with the spirit of the standards whilst taking into account the national legislation that we're governed by. But I think that's just where it's added the complexity rather than it being really huge additional requirements. It's just showing how we've bridged that gap and what things do apply. But yeah, there's some interesting things in there, like professional courage and professional scepticism. Obviously, we've always reported freely. It's never been a problem. In other countries, might not necessarily been the case. You hear the rumours of, internal auditors disappearing or accidentally slipping off of balconies and all sorts of other things. It just doesn't apply to ourselves, but where they are global standards, again, we just have to show we comply. There are a few extra tweaks and twiddles that the council will have to do, but I think that will just be built into the documentation some of the arrangements that already exist, and it may be that there's just an extra one-liner in, for example, your annual governance statement, just to say, yes, we fully comply with all of the codes and all of the standards. But as I say, as soon as those consultations are out, we'll work with Gareth and the team to make sure that everything's in hand.
Thank you. If I can do a sort of a follow-up on that question. You mentioned that the standards now include professional courage and professional scepticism. Could you help me with how those are defined and how you would assess them or measure them?
It's quite an interesting thing. I think we've always had the ethical, professional courage within the UK to report things as they are. I think we can clearly demonstrate where there have been limited assurance opinions previously, or no assurance opinions. It might not make pleasant reading for officers and members, but certainly they've always accepted the findings, challenged where need be. But obviously, if our opinion is based on those discussions that areas are sort of significant and need to be brought to your attention, we do that. We then bring it to your attention. You then hold officers to account for making sure those areas are done. So to me, it doesn't feel like it's going to be any different to how it is previously, but as I say, it's quite different throughout the rest of the world. So I think how we then demonstrate it will just be from the quality of the reports that you see from ourselves. And what will be a little bit more explicit is if we feel that we are being restrained in any way, it's just putting even more of a requirement on ourselves to bring that to your attention. But again, it's never been an issue, and I don't think it will become an issue for ourselves.
So when you're assessing it, it's with regard to your cooperation with you and reactions to your reports, rather than just how their total conduct as an employee.
Yeah, so it's just how we report and how that's received. I think it's that. With regards to the areas that do employ internally, again, you know, we've always been required to be qualified staff that maintain their continual professional development, but there will be a bit more of an explicit requirement to show how we demonstrate that. But it's things we've already done. It's just extra layers of reporting and extra things that we just need to bring to your attention if there are issues. But there's been no areas where previously that wouldn't apply, so it's just making things more transparent.
Yes.
Just to add into that, I have a legal responsibility as a Section 151 officer for the council to ensure that we have an adequate internal audit service, and the internal auditors work for me. They don't work for the chief executive. They work for me to be able to deliver that. But just to give committee assurance, the committee has the ability to talk directly to Southern Internal Audit Partnership and Anthony as our chief internal auditor. So that wouldn't have to come through me. It doesn't have to go through the chief executive as the chair of Audit and Governance Committee. You have direct access to both internal and external auditors, should you wish or should you fear that there was any pressure being applied to our internal audit team from any officers within the council.
And that would apply in the other direction as well, that they could come to me rather than come to me directly as well.
And on that, one of the documents that we've always been required to provide, or certainly since 2013, is what's called the Internal Audit Charter. That be coming to the next committee, and within that, all of those areas have been laid out for the last 11 or 12 years and will continue to be so. And one of the other areas, again, how do we assess ourselves? So it's always been a requirement that we get independently assessed once every 5 years against whatever standards apply. We've been through 2 such external assessments, given the size of the partnership and the fact that we want to be as transparent and as robust as possible, rather than have a nice, cosy relationship with another audit partnership, and we do, you know, their assessment and they do our assessment. We never ever wanted to go down that route. So for both of our external assessments, we've always commissioned the IAA as the standard setters to do those assessments. And both of the assessments that we'd previously been through, we were fully compliant with every element of every standard. We are due for our next external assessment next year. We could have brought that forward and been assessed against the old standards that we knew we were fully compliant with, and essentially gave ourselves a 4-year breathing space to then get our house in order and make sure we were fully compliant with all the new standards. We didn't want to go down that route. We wanted everything to be completely up to date, so we're still committed to be assessed against the new standards, even though those have only been in place for 6 months. In the late summer or autumn of this year, and again, I don't know who will commission to do that, but I'll be surprised if again we didn't commission the IAA to do it, subject to cost, as being the standard setters. So again, we will be vigorously assessed, and it is a very challenging process, but we will be vigorously assessed in sort of September, October time against the new standards by an independent external provider.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from councillors? Then I move the recommendation that the Audit and Governance Committee note the pending implementation of the global internal audit standards. Agreed. Okay, moving to item number 9 on the agenda, the Local Code of Corporate Governance, which is to be introduced by Simon Howson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This report presents to you the Local Code of Corporate Governance, which we bring to you annually and sets out the Council's commitment to corporate governance and the 7 principles of good governance as set out in the SIP for Solace, Delivering Good Governance in Local Government Framework document. This report, largely based around previous year's reports, but helpfully to help you identify changes made from last year's report. In paragraph 11.12, we've outlined the changes in this report from those in previous years. We have reviewed how the Council complies with the 7 principles that is outlined in the appendices and updated those where policies, procedures have been updated. Appendix 1 is the actual local code of corporate governance itself, and Appendix 2 sets out how the Council's policies, procedures comply with those individual principles of good governance that we maintain and update throughout the year as part of our business as usual and good practice. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from officers? From councillors, sorry. Everyone's smiling at me as though they're very content with that report. So, and I'm generally happy with it too. Shall I just move that we accept the recommendation? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. We can move to item number 10, which is the reason for this extraordinary meeting taking place in the first place, a dispensation request, County Council and City Council dual hatters, for Gareth to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this report follows the Council's recent adoption of the new Code of Conduct for Winchester City Council on the 1st of January, which is based, as you know, on the Local Government Association Model Code and accompanying guidance and updated arrangements, the guidance which was approved at the previous Audit and Governance Committee. The code and guidance clarify the position that if a council is in receipt of taxable allowances from another authority, this must now be registered and declared as a disclosable pecuniary interest. Under Part 2, Article 9.5e of the Constitution, this committee has the ability to grant dispensations where they're referred to it by the monitoring officer in accordance with the Localism Act 2011. Following the circulation of this guidance, 5 Winchester City councillors, who also serve on Hampshire County Council, have requested dispensations to continue participating in Winchester City Council meetings where business that concerns Hampshire County Council arises. The dispensations are considered to be in the best interests of Winchester City Council, residents and the council, and they be valid for up to 4 years in respect of the 5 councillors named in the recommendation, which are councillors Porter, Todd, Wallace, Warwick and Williams. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Crimoyson first.
Yeah, where my concerns are with this are dealing with change. So at any time during the year we could have a by-election either here or at the county council where the outcome of it is that someone either who was a county councillor only becomes a dual hatter or vice versa. They were a city councillor then becomes a double hatter. I'm interested to know how that will work in terms of bringing them on board, and does it in effect mean we have to have possibly an extraordinary A&G meeting to deal with that issue, and the timing of that and how that would work relative to other committee and council meetings. And if I could just go on to my supplementary question, which will follow on from that, is can it not be dealt with just a policy decision that we take in the new council year that says anyone who's in those circumstances for the next council year will have that dispensation? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I'll take your supplementary first, I think, because it's probably slightly easier. So in respect of whether it's a policy, unfortunately, that isn't, we have mused over that point over the last couple of months. Unfortunately, the way that the legislation, the Localism Act is drafted, it doesn't enable that to be possible. There are some potential solutions to the issue that you've identified there. If there are changes during the 4-year period, obviously this grants dispensation for those named councillors for that period. Were everything to change in May elections, assuming that they go ahead, then yes, we would require further dispensations. Now, a proposal for getting around that would be to appoint a dispensation subcommittee of this committee, which would perhaps be constituted of maybe 3 members. So that's a proposal that we are considering behind the scenes in terms of that would have to be approved by this committee to obviously set up that sub. So that's something that is being considered. I mean, unfortunately, the way that our constitution is drafted in respect of dispensations currently, it doesn't grant the monitoring officer direct authority to grant dispensations. I mean, there are some councils that do that, but at the moment, I think the probably the best proposition we could bring forward would be a kind of subcommittee arrangement, which would obviously be a lot more flexible than convening a full meeting of this committee.
Councillor Crimoyson, do you have any follow-ups on that?
Yes. So it sounds like there could be a way of redrafting the constitution to manage it in a slicker way.
Yeah.
And the observation I'd make is, you and I have been in conversations where we've been considering how can we make processes slicker and less onerous, particularly on council officers, not just members, but council officers. So I just feel like the way we're having to deal with this is making it more onerous rather than less onerous. So I guess if there's a possibility of tweaking the constitution at some point, that would make it slicker.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's noted, and I'd be in full agreement with that. So that's something that I'll bring forward in due course. Thank you.
Can I ask a sort of a follow-up on Councillor Crimoyson's question? Would it be possible for people who are standing for election to ask for dispensation before they're elected as a way of preempting this problem?
I don't think so. I think given the way that that section of the Localism Act, I can't recall the exact wording of it off the top of my head, but having mused over that in terms of we did consider whether we could just draft this as a blanket dispensation for any sitting city councillor that subsequently becomes a county councillor, and the conclusion that 2 or 3 of us arrived at, having looked at it, was no. So I think not is the answer to the question. I think the easier way around this is looking at a constitutional tweak or setting up some kind of subcommittee of this committee to deal with them in a more efficient manner.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I hate opening the Constitution. It creates all sorts of dialogue on a good day. In the matters, in order to be prudent, would it be sensible if we appointed that subcommittee now? And I'd suggest it would be the chairman or the vice chairman plus 2 others, so that we are prepared should the eventuality arise. My experience is if you have a plan, you don't need it.
Understood. I'd need to bring that back as a proper agenda item and potentially to the next committee, or possibly even consider an amendment that enabled certain dispensations to be granted directly by the monitoring officer. I mean, it would be, I could present both options, I suppose. So yes, I'm happy to bring that forward. Thank you.
Okay, do you have a supplementary?
I do have another comment, Chairman, if I may. Could I just seek confirmation that dual hatters will have to announce that potential interest at every meeting as they do at the moment?
Only at meetings where there is a specific agenda item that relates directly to County Council, so yes. But obviously when they do announce that, they then make reference to dispensation, and obviously things will remain unaltered. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. I think that even under the revised code of conduct, the issue of interest, personal interest, is that it is personal, and it's up to the individual to choose to declare or not declare any interest at any time. I think we shouldn't be too worried about expending more officer time, more member time, helping these poor councillors through this tawdry process of having to say, I've got an interest, or I want to have a dispensation, more than we do once every 4 years. Councillor Williams, when he was elected to Bishop Waltham Division back in October, did not, I do believe, seek a dispensation, and does not have one right now. It's not hampered his activities, I fear. So I'm not sure we are gaining a great deal by spending too much time trying to change the constitution, as Councillor Power says. Not something we want to do readily. So I think we perhaps need to be cautious.
Thank you. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean the broader point is noted certainly, but obviously the new code of conduct wasn't adopted until 1st of January, which is why this has been brought to this committee now. So, and it's now considered a disclosable pecuniary interest if you're receiving a taxable allowance from another authority. So, hence the reason for the timing now.
Do you have a supplementary? You're happy? Okay. Councillor Cumwayson.
I actually think Councillor Chamberlain was before.
Okay.
That's right. Okay. So perhaps this is a more fundamental question I should have asked earlier. When we talk about dispensation, what does that mean? Dispensation from what?
So, in normal circumstances, where a member has got a disclosable pecuniary interest, they are prohibited from participating in that agenda item under the Localism Act. So they would need to declare the nature of their interest and absent themselves for the duration of that meeting. With a dispensation, it effectively nullifies the requirement to do that. So it means that they can continue to participate. They can participate still in that item in the debate and the vote.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll apologise if I'm being slow on the sort of proposed approach of the subcommittee. So is what you're saying that potentially what we could do within this municipal year, appoint a subcommittee that should there be a round of elections with new councillors or councillors potentially restanding who are Hampshire County councillors, that subcommittee would then meet after the elections but before the annual meeting, before then the committee, or before all the appointments are then made for the subsequent municipal year. Is that the suggestion? Yeah,
we could do that, or we could just bring it to the sort of the next available meeting that had capacity and have that as a committee, I suppose, that's set up ready to, a subcommittee that is set up ready to go. So basically, we're a little bit more dynamic than we are currently. I mean, that's one suggestion. The alternative would be to grant authority to the monitoring officer rather than it come back to this committee each time. Yeah, okay. So there are a couple of options there, and I mean, I could bring them both forward for discussion and decision by this committee.
Supplementary.
So, well, I guess in the scenario that the subcommittee met after the annual council, we would just need to consider then the guidance to any affected members who are then attending that meeting. Yeah.
Okay, can I ask a follow-up on that, as it were? So, if there are elections in May and we are having a council meeting to install the new leader of the council and a new mayor,
Yeah.
would we have to have an AGM meeting or subcommittee meeting in order to give dispensation to any newly elected or councillors?
So you mean if we've got additional county members?
If they're new dual
yeah,
hatters
yeah.
by one way or another, yeah.
Yes, in order for them to participate in any agenda items that directly related to Hampshire County Council, yes, but not for meetings generally. It specifically relates to. I mean, it's not something that would come up at every meeting. It would have to be a specific agenda item. So it's highly unlikely that the first meeting, which is quite ceremonial and doesn't concern a lot of business items, would be an issue. So.
No, I mean, it's just because we would also be voting on the leader of the council at the same time, which can be more of a political decision, where if it was very finely balanced, the attendance of every single councillor might sway the difference.
Yeah, yeah. It wouldn't, in my view, it wouldn't be an issue for that type of decision at that stage, because it doesn't directly relate to a Hampshire County Council interest that one of those councillors might have.
Okay, thanks. Do you have any further questions, Councillor Chambers? Sorry.
Thank you. And I fear Mr. Howson may owe you a coffee because we've clearly saved all of our questions up for this section of the meeting. So my second question was actually on something separate. So section 11.3, if I read that correctly, so that clearly states that any member in receipt of taxable allowances from another authority would have to register such as a DPI. So this, if I understand this section correctly, confirms that if you are a parish councillor who is in receipt of allowance from a district, that should then be disclosed to the parish council, if I've read that correctly.
That's correct. If they've adopted that code of conduct, then yes. But the power to grant dispensations for parish councils is within the gift of the parish clerk.
I have a question. If there was, if the fire alarm were to go off now, and we were not to grant this item, what would happen at the next council meeting?
We'd simply adjourn this meeting and reconvene it.
So, okay, to phrase the question in a different way, if we all were gripped by a fever of madness and decided not to have this recommendation,
yeah,
what would happen to those 5 councillors at the next?
So
meeting?
they would, if there were an agenda item that arose at one of those meetings that directly related to Hampshire County Council, they would have to declare a DPI and absent themselves for that item.
Okay, so that's the alternative option we have. We could exclude any of these councillors at the meeting if so wished, but I don't think we do. Do you have any further questions? Okay, then I move the recommendation that the Audit and Governance Committee grants a dispensation for a period of up to 4 years, or for the time each councillor remains a county councillor, whichever is longest, to councillors Porter, Todd, Wallace, Warwick and Williams. Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay, that's the final item on our agenda, so I'll declare this meeting closed. Thank you very much to everyone. There we go.